Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. Thursday was an eventful day for the Browns as quarterback Deshaun Watson settled with the NFL. He'll be suspended for the first 11 games, fined $5 million, and promptly undergo behavior evaluation and the treatment that follows. Then he and owners Dee and Jimmy Haslam and general manager Andrew Berry talked to reporters. Here to discuss it all with me is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. Chud, how about that day yesterday, huh?
Oh my gosh. So of course I took yesterday off and I'm off today. Murphy's Law that would happen. But I'm not in the sports department anymore. So, when stuff like that happens, I don't have to trot on into Berea, unfortunately, like you have to. I mean, I don't say the word unfortunately, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Sure. You've just been your whole life is on hold waiting for this announcement, and that's the way it is in this business. But that's what we signed up for, and that's fine. But the bottom line is uh, it was eventually going to happen. Now, I think the bottom line to all this, and we're going to really dive into all of it, right? But the bottom line to all this is we have clarity now. So, and regardless of what side of the fence you're on, at least we know now what's going on.
Yeah, certainly from a football perspective, right? I think there's still some uncertainties regarding, Deshaun Watson's apology or sincerity of the apology and all those kinds of things. And I do want to get into that a little bit. But from a football perspective, you're 100% right. We know how long he'll be out. We know when he'll be back. And now it's about how do the Browns proceed without, their quote unquote, or it's not even quote unquote, without their franchise quarterback, right, for the first 11 games of the season. And can they survive and put themselves in a position? Because when we talk about football, it's about going to the playoffs. So can they put themselves in a position to be in contention when he returns, right? And then it's another question whether or not he'll be able to be the same player when he comes back. It's been told it'll be 700 days between regular season games, assuming he plays December 4th in Houston, right? And there's 8 million storylines because it's Houston. But the first question I think from a Browns perspective is, how do you get through 11 games, and can you do it with Jacoby Brissett, or do you need to make a different move there?
It's unbelievable that they opened the season in Carolina against Baker Mayfield, and then his first game that he can play is in Houston against the Texans. I mean, come on.
Isn't it?
I mean, this is storybook. Nick Camino put something out yesterday. I thought it was funny. He's like NFL, WWE.
Yeah, right, right. That's so funny.
It feels that way.
I know, and I'm not really a conspiracy theory guy, but I believe the NFL pulls strings and they go through, so many iterations of the schedule, and they try to set up these matchups, right? They want storylines for these matchups, for these games and individual matchups and all that. But the Baker to Carolina was a possibility when the schedule came out, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion, right? And I don't know if the league went around thinking, okay, that's going to be a huge week one game. And then I don't think there's any way when the NFL was thinking about how long Watson's suspension was going to be that it would land on 11. Like, I really don't, if they didn't want this to be part of it, right, they could have made it week one because they knew he was going to be suspended week one, right? Back in April or May, whenever the schedule comes out. But, so you put it week 12 and you're thinking, okay, he'll probably be back. And then the fact that it's week or whatever, it's game 12, right? And the fact that they settle on 11, I do think it's a coincidence. Maybe it's not for Watson. Maybe he's fought really hard to get back to play that game. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this.
Talk about that.
Let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
And I know there's conspiracy theories, but I saw someone tweet something about the money, like the fact that he gets to play 6 games, guarantees something along with the money. Is that accurate? Because that could have been his camp fighting to make sure that he got back at that point.
I certainly think that's a factor. And after the news conferences yesterday, I did go up to Andrew Berry and just say, hey, I need to know for sure, is his contract, like, does this count a year against his contract? And he said, yes. He goes, nothing changes. This is the first year of the 5-year. And I'm paraphrasing, right? I just asked him, so I knew. So this is the first year of the 5-year, $230 million contract. If the suspension were a season, then it would just have moved to the next year, and it would then the contract would have carried over till 2027. So I'm sure that was a huge point for Watson in settling it all. Is now he'll be able to become a free agent again in 2027, right? And he's not tied to the Browns for an extra year, which is huge financially, right? Who knows what a big time starting quarterback will be making 5 years from now, right? It could be $70 million. So I think that was really important. Now, as far as the dividing line, 6 games or fewer, there's stuff in the CBA about how many games you need to play to, for that year to be invested. I think there would have been struggles or conversations whether or not, if it had been fewer games, if it had counted, whether or not the Browns would have really been stringent about that and said, no, we're not going to count this year. And then it becomes a whole process between the league and the NFLPA. So I know that settling at 11 games removed any of that doubt and made it definitive that this counts as the first year of his contract.
And let's make something clear here. This was, just so everyone knows, this was not a ruling. This was a settlement.
Correct. It was, yeah, Sue Robinson gave the initial 6-game suspension, right? In her ruling as a disciplinary officer. The NFL appealed. While the NFL's waiting for the appeals, the Peter C. Harvey, who heard the appeal, while they're waiting for him to give a decision, that's when the league and Deshaun Watson reached the settlement. And I fully believe that Harvey was waiting to rule so that his settlement could be worked out, because there's benefits to both sides, right? We just talked about one of the benefits to Deshaun Watson, and in addition, he gets to play this year, which I'm sure is important to him. From the NFL perspective, the NFL was fighting for, the indefinite suspension of at least a year, plus the fine, plus the treatment. But if that would have gone through and there's no settlement, and that's what Peter C. Harvey had ruled, then there's a really good chance the NFLPA would have sued. And then you have all that, right? All that goes along with it. Does stuff get released? Are there depositions? Does he play while this goes through court? All those things that I think the league is better off avoiding.
Yes.
Basically, from the easiest thing is that this story now fades a little bit. It's never going to go away, but it fades as opposed to being a headline every day until there's final resolution. And that final resolution appeared to come yesterday with the settlement.
Yeah. So to expand on what you're saying there, and believe me, there are no winners in this. Nobody wins, right. But I have to believe, in my opinion, okay, and you just kind of touched on it, both sides probably are happy with where they're at when you consider both sides wanted completely different things. And by that, I mean, Watson wanted no games, right? And the NFL wanted a full year. But here's the thing. Why? There's no way Watson was going to get no games. And then he clearly got 6. But the NFL, obviously, they were like, come on, 6 games. And they wanted more than that. So what happens here is that the NFL's this. Tell me if you think I'm right here. I think the NFL's probably sitting there saying, all right, we wanted a full year, but you know what? It's kind of our fault that we don't have a better system set up for something like this, because technically, like Sue L. Robinson only went 6 games because of the rules they had set in place, right? So maybe the NFL's sitting there going, you know what? We can handle 11 games and a $5 million fine. Gosh, there had to be a fine involved with this, right? Yeah. And then, and then in Watson's case, he's probably sitting there going, well, man, this could have been a year. It would have been 2 full years I don't play. It takes longer to get my money, and he's, sure, he only gets 6 games, but am I right there? Do you feel like both sides are kind of feeling that way?
Yeah, I think, I don't have any issue with what you just said. But I also think it's like a lot of negotiations where nobody's completely happy either, right? Like, you can live with this, but I think the NFL I know there's people inside the league that were adamant that Deshaun Watson should not play this year. So those people will not be happy, right? And from a public relations standpoint, I think this has just been bad for everyone involved, including the league. And I'm not sure I guess an indefinite suspension would have looked better for the league from a lot of its critics. But, so then they settled for 11 games yesterday, and obviously this person is biased. But Tony Busby, the attorney for all the plaintiffs in this case, rips the NFL in a statement, right? So, because he feels like they caved, the NFL caved. So, not everybody will be happy. And I think, obviously, Deshaun Watson would have preferred 0 or 6 or 8, right? Less than a $5 million fine. So, nobody's completely thrilled, but I agree with your point that both sides can live with this,
Right.
right? And I guess that's the bottom line of most negotiations. As feels a little seamless to talk about negotiations when there's so many layers to this, right? And the women have no role. Jimmy hasn't complained that the Browns have no role in these negotiations, right? It's between NFLPA and the NFL. And obviously Watson is part of that NFLPA side. But the women had no say in any of this, right? Once the civil suits and the couple of criminal, the grand juries, and I'm not trying to get on a soapbox here, but the point is, we talk about negotiations like it's you're buying a car, but there's a lot of people involved in this. So I just want to make that clear. Like we're focused on football, and I get it. We're talking about the nuts and bolts, but this is a bigger issue, right? And Deshaun Watson admitted this, at least, that there are people triggered by this, right? And to hear, the ruling and all that, it's been going on for now 5 months, that there's a lot of people that this hits negatively, and, that obviously continued yesterday.
Help me out with this to try to understand, because, all day long yesterday, and again, I was off, and I watched as much as I could. I tried to pay attention. I did a lot of catching up this morning, but all day yesterday, I kept thinking the weird thing about this is that he's saying that he's innocent,
Yep.
but yet then the Browns are saying he needs help. So it's kind of like, well, what does he need help for if he's innocent?
Yeah, it was, we've talked about this, Chud, but I left Berea yesterday at about 9:30 at night, thinking that was one of the days I'll never forget, right? And there's some of them, you have a number of those, but not, it's not like I got 100 of them. I forget a lot of stuff, but this will be a day I remember. And because number one, it's a huge news day, right? It's a huge national story. So that's part of it. But then the surprise I had, it's bigger than surprise, the shock I had in hearing Deshaun Watson and Jimmy Haslam in particular, in their interviews with the media yesterday, and we're taping this Friday, so that was Thursday. I was really taken aback by the tone and by the messages from both those guys. And, it started with Deshaun Watson, who, he gave that apology before the Jacksonville game. He was interviewed by Aditi Kinkawala, who works for the team. And he gave his first apology, in my opinion, his first apology. He said there's no regret. When he said in June, he said, I regret saying in March I had no regrets because it triggered people. That didn't really strike me as an apology. So I felt like last Friday, before the Jacksonville game, was Watson's first apology. It was vague, but it was an apology. At the time, it felt like a step toward getting a settlement with the NFL, right? Because the NFL has been adamant that he needs to show contrition. And Sue L. Robinson, in her ruling, talked about his lack of remorse, and that was an aggravating factor in her judgment and her discipline. So that's what it felt like, right? And you can, it's up to each person to decide if he was sincere or not, but it felt like the timing of it was certainly noteworthy to me. So then for him to come out yesterday and say, yes, I apologize to all these people, and then say, but I stand on my innocence. I asked him, I go, well, then what are you apologizing for? Right? And then he gives an answer, I'm apologizing to everyone who's been affected by this. I don't know if he used trigger in that answer, but he's triggered at some point. And then I said, does that include the women that accused you? And he said, yes, it includes everyone. Right? He goes, even you. I apologize to everyone. But then his agent goes on Twitter and says he's never admitting any guilt, right? ESPN has a tweet saying the settlement is not an admission of guilt. So if you're not admitting any guilt and you're saying you're completely innocent, then what do you have to apologize for? Right. So it's I found it really I don't know, incongruous, and I understand if he wants to proclaim his innocence and he feels he did nothing wrong. I understand that. And I understand the real world part of I have to move on with my life. In the settlement, I have to admit some kind of guilt or whatever, right? So I understand that. But what I don't understand, and this is to your point, is then why do the Browns keep saying, yes, he's showing remorse, and yes, he's getting better? And Jimmy Haslam goes on a rant about second chances. Well, why does he need a second chance if he didn't do anything wrong? So I'm with you. I feel like there's a disconnect. And I do think Dee Haslam, her interview was not perfect by any means. And I thought she tried to take it from a Deshaun Watson conversation to like a sexual trafficking conversation. And I did not feel that was the right time for that, the appropriate time. This is a Deshaun Watson conversation, right? There can be bigger issues in sexual assault, right? And the Browns are putting in money, $1 million. The NFL's putting in $1 million. Deshaun Watson's fine goes to a fund to help educate kids and prevent sexual assault. So I get that, and that's probably a conversation for another day. But this was a Deshaun Watson conversation. Having said that, I thought Dee made one of the better points of the interviews when she said that counseling takes time, and she believes that eventually Watson will, I guess, come to learn that he did do things wrong, right? That's how I interpret it is, hey, he's early into counseling. When he goes through this and is open to it, then his opinion will change. And that's really interesting because obviously Deshaun Watson is not going into any counseling. He's talked about he's already started counseling, right? Maybe not the NFL mandated counseling, but he's already started counseling. And he hasn't had a change of opinion, at least that he showed to us yesterday in that public forum, if that makes sense at all.
Man, I saw that soundbite from her, and that is some amazing insight by you right there. I think you just that really is fantastic work by you, and I think that will go a long way. I think too I think Watson just is also sitting there going, "Hey, I wasn't criminally charged, so I didn't do anything wrong."
Well, yeah, he referred to that. Which we've talked about this on the pod before, Chud. Just like he says, the settlements, not only with the NFL, but with 23 of the 24 accusers in civil lawsuits, just like he says that's not an admission of guilt, which is correct. Just because you're not criminally charged does not mean you didn't do something. And you can talk to any lawyer about that. Just because you're not indicted doesn't mean you're innocent. Okay? So all that stuff can be true. It doesn't mean he's guilty, but it doesn't mean he's innocent. There's plenty of people not indicted that did what they were accused of doing. So I just think it's really interesting. And for him to have the strong stance that he had doesn't mean he won't change. Doesn't mean counseling won't help. But it's interesting because I feel like the Browns are expecting him to have a shift, right? They have admitted that. And is that shift going to happen in 11 games, right? Or however long it is until December 4th? Like they have a ton of money invested in here in Deshaun Watson, right? They're like next 5 years ride on Deshaun Watson being a great player and being available and being all the things they need him to be and the face of the franchise, right? And I don't think it's unfair to say right now, having talked to him yesterday, it doesn't seem like he is where he needs to be. And I think the Browns admitted as much. So, how fast does he get, where they think he needs to be? Or is that just bluster and they don't think it's a big deal because they paid him and they're defending him still. And Jimmy Haslam is real defensive and defiant. And it's all about getting him back on the football field, right? Like there's just so many layers to this. And we really got to look at a ton of them during those interviews yesterday.
Kind of just a yes or no answer because I think you've already answered it. But bottom line, did the Browns look bad yesterday in all this?
I think they look terrible. I think Watson looked terrible. I think the Browns look terrible.
Yeah. Okay. So, obviously we didn't know what the final answer would be, but on our last podcast, we ended with, hey, what do you think's going to happen? And we both agreed that it wouldn't stay at 6. We both kind of thought we were looking at a year, but we also said that we wouldn't be surprised. We both said, no way would it just be 8, because they're not going to go through all this for 2 more games. So the final answer is 11. And it's an odd number because everyone was always like 2,
Right.
6, 8, 10, 12. It's 11.
Yeah. There must be an odd number bias in the media or something. Because you're right. Everything had been even. And I wondered myself, well, why are we dealing with even numbers? But I think traditionally suspensions are even numbers. Most of them are. I know that Watson's allowed back in the building. It's usually halfway through a suspension, but because it's an odd number, they shift it toward the player side, so he's allowed back in the building 5 weeks into the suspension instead of 5.5 or 6. So he'll be allowed back in the building October 10th. He can
Week
practice,
5.
Right. He can practice November 14th. And then, he's eligible November 28th, which is the start of that Texans week.
And he will not play in the preseason. He's allowed to, but he won't because Stefanski said he won't. Correct.
Yeah, he's still got a bunch of snaps yesterday. I was able to get out finally and watch some practice yesterday. And he took a bunch of the second team reps. It was mostly Jacoby Brissett and then Watson. And Stefanski said that'll continue the next 2 days because these are really valuable practices. And they are trying to get Watson ready, right? Like they're counting on him playing. But after this weekend, or after today, really, because he's not going to play Sunday, they're going to not shut him down, but Stefanski said most of his work will come on the side. He's not going to get those reps with the team because then they shift to kind of regular season mode and preparing Jacoby Brissett, preparing, I guess, Josh Dobbs or Josh Rosen to be the backup, but we could have another quarterback move, right? But yeah, so he's going to kind of be pushed to the side, still be there. And then on August 30th, cutdown day, he has to leave the facility for the next, whatever month plus.
Yeah. Both of us, Browns fans from a long time ago, our whole lives here, Scott, we've seen it all. And, last year on this podcast, I warned everybody, don't pencil in 13, 14 wins just because of all the talent. I'm going to warn everyone now. If you're sitting there going, well, if we just, go 5-6 with Jacoby Brissett, then Watson will come back and win every game and we'll be in the playoffs. I mean, first of all, like I nothing tells me, and we talked about this months ago. You and I did, and who's to say when he comes back, he's going to be fresh and ready to roll and win? I mean, there's no guarantee he's going to win every game just because you plop him out in the field. I just want to warn fans. Listen, you can play the schedule game all you want, but this is not going to be easy.
No, you're 100% right, Chud. I was thinking about that yesterday, and I wrote a story how Jimmy Haslam kind of reminded everyone, hey, we still have a good team. They expressed confidence in Jacoby Brissett, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But the football question is, where do they need to be when Watson comes back? Right? You have the issue of, okay, how will Watson play when he comes back? And that's a big issue, right? What kind of rust, how does he handle the reception on the road, which is going to be brutal, just because we saw what was in Jacksonville, and there's nobody in the stadium and they're Jacksonville fans, right? Let alone you go to Pittsburgh or Baltimore or Houston, So how does he handle it? But even if he plays well, right, where do the Browns need to be to have a shot? And, you're right. There's no way you can count on them going undefeated. To me, that's absurd to think that. I think if they're 6-5 when he comes back, then and he can go 4-2, which doesn't seem like you're asking too much, right? 4-2 seems like, okay, it's a reasonable request. Then maybe they get in at 10-7, right? Like that's kind of where I'm putting it, is they need to be 6-5. Now I know that they won't be eliminated if they're 5-6 or even 4-7. They probably wouldn't be eliminated, but I don't know if 9-7 gets in the playoffs in a stacked AFC. So I think it's 5-6 or 6-5, but I think I would feel, if you're a Browns fan, way better about 6-5, because then you have at least a little cushion, and you're not asking Watson to come back after 700 days and go 6-0, against a schedule that I'm not staring at the schedule, but I know it includes some AFC North opponents down the stretch.
Yeah. I mean, you always end the year with two teams in your division. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm
it's
calling it up
never
right
easy.
now. I mean,
Yeah.
they come back. It's Houston at Cincinnati, Baltimore, New Orleans, Washington at Pittsburgh, right? So you got to be playing your best football, no matter who's playing quarterback, to have a chance to go, whatever, 5-1, 4-2. So yeah, I think those are legitimate points, Chud, that you make for sure. And now the question is, not to steal the host role a little bit, but can they go 6-5 with Jacoby Brissett, or do they need to make a move? What do you think?
You just took the next question I had for you.
I knew I would. I knew I wanted to preempt you.
Yeah, you got me. Boy, the only reason I would say there's a possibility is because of those first 4 games. It's just so, and again, you never guarantee a win. And I just talked about that, but I guess, if they could go 3-1 in their first 4 games, then, they have the potential to do that. But I don't know, man. 6-5, 5-6. I'm going to say right now, I'll say 4 wins right now.
Okay. All right. Which is not enough. Which, if that's how you feel, then I think that means you need to go get Jimmy Garoppolo. And I'm trying to finish. I've written this column months ago, and I've been, fiddling with it, waiting for the actual resolution, right? Is it a whole season? Because if it's a whole season, if it were to have been a whole season, I would have easily said you go get Jacoby or you go get Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Like, it would have been a no-brainer to me. But at 11 games, I think that's kind of the gray area of whether or not you need to go get Jimmy Garoppolo. I think I'm going to columnize that they should, because the season is too important, right? There's too many stars in their prime on this roster, too much changes from this year to next year. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo's an upgrade over Jacoby Brissett, a big enough upgrade. Now, I don't know if the Browns agree with me, and in fact, I think they probably don't, and they really like Jacoby Brissett and don't love Jimmy Garoppolo. But, just looking at stats and watching him play, I like Garoppolo better than Brissett. And even if you're the Browns and you think, okay, we trust Brissett, what's the backup plan, right? Josh Dobbs isn't going to go 6-5. I don't think Josh Rosen's going to go 6-5. So do you go get Jimmy Garoppolo and say, hey, you're coming in as a number 2, but we might need you to be the number 1, right? Like, I think quarterback is so important. And I know Deshaun Watson's going to come back this season, right? I know that's what the settlement means. But it doesn't mean you can kind of give away those, and giveaway is too strong. It doesn't mean you can. It doesn't mean the first 11 games aren't extremely important, and you need to do all you can at the most important position to win those games. Now, the question for me is, do you trade, which means you acquire his $24 million contract, which is too much to pay a guy to maybe be a backup for 11 games? I get that. But can you work out a deal where he takes less money, kind of like Baker did in the trade to Carolina? Or do you wait until the 49ers likely cut him and then try to sign Jimmy Garoppolo? I still think that's a really good plan because, as you said, Chud, do you trust Jacoby Brissett to go 6-5 and not get hurt because there's not a plan B on the roster right now? So I'm heavily leaning toward saying that they should go get Jimmy Garoppolo.
I hate doing this but usually when people do it, it's when the schedule first comes out. But let's do the schedule game real quick here. And let's see where we end up. So I got the schedule pulled up here. All right. So Carolina week 1, win or lose. They never win their first game, Scott.
And the Baker factor, Chud, you can't ignore it. He is going to be playing at a crazy emotional level. That doesn't mean he'll play at a great level. He'll be playing at a crazy emotional level. Sitting here right now, I would go Carolina.
I'm going loss. I agree. Jets win.
Yeah.
1-1 Steelers at home.
Yeah, it's a Thursday night. I would take the Browns there.
All right, we'll give them that 2-1 at the Falcons, 3-1.
Yeah,
okay.
They should win that game. Yeah.
Okay, because the Falcons are just not that great. They got a lot of transition going on. So all right, so there we go. I had mentioned earlier 3-1. So they go 3-1. That's where they need to be. But then home to the Chargers. I don't think so. I think that's a loss.
Right.
You agree?
Yes, I agree.
They're 4-2. Home to the Patriots.
I mean, that's a winnable game.
I said 4-2. They are actually 3-2. My bad. So 3-2 heading into the Patriots.
Man, Patriot. I mean, I'll be optimistic. Give them a win.
All right, so you're going to go 4-2. I'm going to give them a loss and say 3-3.
All right.
Oh man, I almost have to give them a win there to have a chance when you look at these next two games at the Ravens and then Halloween against the Bengals. I mean, do you see them winning either of those two?
No, I mean, I guess you can say no. They lose in Baltimore, and then you can say, okay, they split the New England Cincinnati games, right? It's a Monday night, Halloween. Yep. People be juiced up, right? So that still gets them to 4-4, right?
That's is that 8 games?
I think so. Yeah, because that's in the bye. Yep. That's the bye. Yeah.
All right, so 4-4 at the bye. So at Dolphins, at Bills, home to Tampa Bay, and you assume Tom Brady's there, but he's not there right now.
That's 1-2 at best, right? You beat a Miami team that could exceed expectations. Buffalo could be the best team in the league, and Tampa's Tampa.
So, so basically, we're saying that they're not going to go 6-5. Yeah. There's potential to go 5-6, but it also could be 4-7.
Yeah, and that's and I don't know how much my opinion would change if it were Garoppolo and not Brissett, right? But I think it gives you a chance to win some of those games on the edges. Some of those margin games. Can you go in? I mean, they almost went into Baltimore last year and won with Baker playing terrible and the team playing terrible, right? They had 4 interceptions. They couldn't win the game. So, if Garoppolo plays like he did in his best moments with the Niners, right? With a heavy run game and a really good defense, which the Browns have both of those elements, I think they have a chance to win more of those games. Now, I'm not saying they can't win them with Brissett if they run the ball great and play great defense. I just
think,
point, right? I just think I just think Garoppolo's better than Brissett is what it boils down to. Now, if you're the Browns, you have a financial decision to make. Is he X number of dollars better, right? And is he helping us if he comes in August 20th, if they made the trade tomorrow, right? Those are legitimate questions. But I think if you just take a step back and go big picture, to me, it's can we improve our quarterback for 11 crucial games? Because none of it, Deshaun Watson coming back for 6 games doesn't matter if the Browns go 3-8, and it probably doesn't matter if they go 4-7, right? So what can you do to assure you don't do that? And beefing up your quarterback roster, to me, is the number one thing you can do. And we've talked about this before, Chud, that when they got Jacoby Brissett, I truly believe the Browns thought the suspension would be no more than 6 games. And you could live with Jacoby Brissett for 6 games. Can you live with him for 11 is the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great points. And you're right. I mean, listen, we're making predictions now based on how we feel. But if they come out, like you said, and they can just run the ball and their defense is phenomenal and you just have a game manager, hey, we could be wrong. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I don't want to do doomsday. I think that, there's a lot of talent on this roster. There's ways to win games. It just becomes a lot harder when you don't have a Pro Bowl type quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. And it becomes a lot harder if you go from whatever, second level to third level or third level to fourth level, wherever I feel the Garoppolo to Brissett drop off is. Now, Brissett could play better than Garoppolo, right? Like, I'm not ruling that out. I know the Browns have confidence in him. I had a good interview with Monday We'll Talk Football, and I sat down with Amari Cooper and had a really good interview. And at the end, I asked him about Brissett, and he gave a couple good examples of why he likes Jacoby Brissett, why he has confidence in him. So I don't want to dismiss Brissett out of hand, right? I haven't seen him play in a game with the Browns. But you watch him in practice, he's not special in practice. So it's going to be, can he manage games well enough? And I know the Browns, he probably manages games better than Jimmy G. but does he have the ability to make those, whatever it is, 2, 3, 4, 5 plays a game to win you a game? That I think we've seen Garoppolo make it sometimes. And I don't know if you have confidence that Brissett's going to make them. And again, this is not a rip Jacoby Brissett. It's just the Browns signed him to be a backup. Can he start for 11 games and win you 6 of them?
All right. Before we go to rapid fire and finish this thing out, anything else on the Watson scenario and all of that?
No, I guess the last point I would make is I do think, and I've read a couple things. It probably bears watching given this innocent stance we talked about. Is he willing to, and he said he would because he signed the settlement, but how willing will he be to go through the behavioral evaluation and the treatment that would follow? Because that's part of the settlement, right? Like his coming back in week 13 is contingent on that. So I would fully expect him to do that because he knows that's part of it, and he knows that's the only road back to playing. But it'll be interesting given how he talked yesterday.
All right, let's go rapid fire. 20 seconds for each answer, Scott, and I'll buzz you if you don't stop. All right, because you got some work to do here, man. You got to get back. You got to get out to Berea. So 20 seconds, and we're gonna go. Is that cool with you? Can you make that work?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Little rapid fire. Number one, and I had a whole list of things to talk about with you, and maybe one day we'll get to those things.
Yeah,
all right, but number one, 20 seconds, boy. You rest all your starters, and then you lose your center for the year. I mean, what a blow that is.
Yeah, it's big. Obviously they have some faith in Easton Posick, who's the backup. I would go get JC Treader. It doesn't seem like they're inclined to do that. Maybe that changes week 2. There's contract rules about veterans being on the team week 1 versus week 2. But again, we're talking about building this roster up. JC Treader would improve this team.
All right, good job. 21 seconds. Myles Garrett, everything okay there? He's dealing with a family issue?
Yeah, it's a family issue. One of his family members is really sick. But he's due back soon. I don't think it's anything to worry about, except from a personal level, it's really tough for Myles to go through.
Joint practice with the Eagles, from what you saw yesterday, how'd everything go?
Yeah, it's interesting. You could see kind of both fields where I was standing. You can't, watch every play on each field, but a couple interceptions. Jacob Phillips, the middle linebacker, made a really nice interception. He dropped deep in coverage. He showed his range and speed. It was a really nice play. The tight end showed up for the Browns, and Anthony Schwartz has had a bounce back from that terrible 2 drops in Jacksonville. He's had some good practices, including a long catch yesterday.
Jerome Ford, real deal?
Yes, he is, Chud. Now, I'm not calling him Nick Chubb, but he showed up in training camp, showed up in the preseason, and continues to show up in training camp. Had a really nice cut yesterday in 11-on-11s. I like him, which means we could see Dearness Johnson get traded.
Okay, and finally, what are you looking for? Sunday at 1, Browns, Eagles, preseason game number 2.
Yeah, I haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about it because of all this other stuff, but I'll tell you this, it's going to be a lot of Josh Dobbs and Josh Rosen. So to me, it's going to be some level of rehearsal or audition to see if either one of those guys can serve as that backup for those first 11 games, or do the Browns have to go get somebody? And I'm not saying necessarily Jimmy Garoppolo or Cam Newton, but do they need to go get someone with starting experience because they don't trust Dobbs or Rosen as the number 2? And I think those are legitimate questions. And I know it's only preseason, but let's say each one plays a half. I think you'll get a better reading after that.
All right, nicely done. And also, I wanted to retract something I said before. They end the year with the division opponent, not the last 2 games, because they play Washington second last game. So you always end with the division opponent. So just thought of that now. So nicely done there on rapid fire. That's it for me. Unless you got anything, I'm done.
I don't. Thank you, Chud. Appreciate the time as always. Plenty to talk about. And yeah, we'll do this again next week because I do want to talk about that Amari Cooper interview at some point. We talked 53-man roster because that's going to be coming before you know it. The cut down's August 30th. And I'm sure there'll be plenty more to discuss. So Thank you, Chud. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you can read all my work at brownszone.com. Thanks.